The views and opinions of this program are those of the host, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading. Today's episode of Market Talk is brought to you by Growmark FS. Keeping up with the latest in ag is a challenge, to say the least, but there are experts nearby ready to help. You'll find them at your local FS. You can trust them to bring you customized agronomic, grain, and energy solutions born of the latest thinking. That's because FS specialists receive continuous training that keeps them current on the latest trends, practices, and technologies. So you'll get local expertise that's both exceptional and up to date. Visit fssystem.com to learn how FS is bringing you what's next. And joining us now as we continue to take a look at the market trade, wrapping up the week on Friday, had the June WASDE report. Really, again, not a lot of changes in that June WASDE report. Market reaction, pretty minimal with the minimal changes to the balance sheets. We did see a flash sale of beans, though, and some strength in the bean oil market to talk about on Friday. Plenty of things to discuss. Joining us now, Kristi Van Ahn-Kjeseth with Van Ahn & Company is with us. Kristi, it's great to catch up with you. I hope things are going well there in central Minnesota.
It is, yeah. It was a little bit of a slow start for us. We, really struggled to get in the ground, and once it stopped raining, it never started back up. And so you were able to get everything finished, but now we're looking at really dry concerns. We've had a few pop-up showers, but overall, if we could just get some rains, I think the crop would be looking really good. We've had a very warm start to summer, which has been nice for the most part, but definitely if we could get a drink of water, it'd be way better.
Well, we're going to talk about getting that drink of water here because that's a big part of this market trade right now. We're going to do that here in a minute. I want to just get your thoughts on the June WASDE report. As I mentioned, not many changes, and I think the changes that we did see to the balance sheets were pretty much as expected. Some of those South American numbers, the global numbers, though, U.S. numbers, really not much movement. Everything pretty much in line with expectations. Is that kind of how you took the WASDE report on Friday?
Yeah, there was a crop report today. No, I'm kidding. It was so quiet. It was
right.
It was
I know.
absolutely it was. Yeah, I mean, the June report tends to be a little bit of a quiet report because people are kind of tucking it away, saying, hey, for the most part, USDA should be going off the numbers we've already seen from them. Our first look from May, they shouldn't really adjust much. There's been years in the past that they have adjusted yield due to a slow start. We really didn't have so much of that issue, but you could maybe say, hey, maybe they wanted to adjust yield for corn because of the poor conditions that we currently have. But you can also say, hey, it's so early in the season, they could really justify just leaving it. And that's what they did. So we saw very limited changes. One thing I was a little surprised on, they did increase yield for wheat. And that one caught me off guard a little bit. Not that it made a huge change. It was 0.2 bushel per acre. So really not a big deal. But I was kind of surprised just because of the conditions that we have and the major rains that we've had to help the drought concerns in winter wheat country came pretty late. And we also know that you didn't get off to the best start for spring wheat. And so that was a little bit surprising, but overall, everything fell into expectations. The only changes we had for corn and beans came from old crop adjustments and export demand. And I think that was very justified. Like we are, every time you're going to have somebody start to talk about how bullish they want to be on weather concerns, every time on social media that you see those poor conditions for crops and the lack of drought, the drought concerns in the Eastern Corn Belt, that is such a big part of this market, but we have to be met with the fact that our demand has been extremely poor. And I don't want to be this huge Debbie Downer here, but that's something that we need to fix, and we need to fix fast because Brazil has a fantastic crop coming for their second corn crop. We are not priced even remotely close to be competitive right now. And so that's going to be a big thing to work through because right now on the balance sheet, especially for corn, USDA has a lot of demand plugged in, like a lot of demand plugged in. And even with those large amounts, we are still well over a 2 billion bushel carryout, and that's not a good thing for this corn market. And so we need to figure out a way to adjust that to some degree. And is that a supply change, or is that finding a way to be competitive? Now, we saw our first private sale in soybeans today in quite some time to unknown destination, which is typically China. And so I'm hoping this is the start of maybe another round of purchases for them. that we need to see. Otherwise, we're really off to a slow start.
Well, talking about that demand picture, I'm glad you brought that up because it is such a huge point right now. And you mentioned USDA's got a lot of demand in the balance sheet on the U.S. side, but it feels like to that point, that demand probably shouldn't be there because countries like Brazil, other countries around the world, we're seeing kind of that shift right now where there is good demand globally for certain commodities like corn and beans, but not really the U.S. I mean, are you hearing any chatter through the trade? Is it what's the deal here? Does our grain have a funny smell to it, or what's going on here, Kristi?
Yeah, it's just not. I mean, like with our dollar and everything, we are just overpriced. And you look at it, USDA even acknowledged it today in wheat. They dropped our wheat average farm price that they're estimating by 30 cents from $8 to $7.70. And they just acknowledge the fact that, there's world demand, but there's also plenty around the world. And I think that's what we're dealing with right now when you look at the demand side. And I don't want to come across as saying the world is over, because that's not what I believe. It's just we are going to be met with some adjustments along the way on supply issues. And I really think, especially for the corn market, you're looking at a balance sheet that has plenty of slush to move around. You can kind of fine tune it where when everything shakes out, we're still stuck with the same carryout. And we really need to get this carryout sub 2 billion bushel to really keep this market's attention. And I think corn's going to have its moment, but the way it is set up, if corn gives us an opportunity, I am going to be aggressive because I'm just worried about everything that's on the table there.
Well, Kristi, I know as we turn our attention to the weather, it's been very hot and dry in many parts of the Corn Belt here the last few weeks, especially the eastern Corn Belt, but even pockets into Iowa, then along the Missouri River into Nebraska, parts of Minnesota as well started to show up on the drought monitor. Just wondering your thoughts with weather. There's this anticipated pattern change here expected to start this weekend. Wondering, though, if we don't really see it, man, I wonder what this could do. Could this continue our weather rally? Or on the flip side, if we do see this pattern change, do you think that could put a halt to this weather rally that we have seen in the grains?
Yeah, so if you guys aren't listening to Eric Snodgrass's morning commentary every morning, you guys are missing out. I've learned more about jet flow and streams than I have ever cared to know about, but it's been a big deal for this market. And that's one thing we've been learning, is that there is the potential for this pattern to change. And I think you have this double-edged sword happening right now, that you had dry conditions, you got good planting, put it into moisture, had dry conditions, and you have the ability for this corn crop to really root itself down. And if you do that and then turn around and start putting this timely moisture on it, I'm just wondering what kind of potential we could have out there. And I really do think that the potential would be large if you could continue to have those timely rains. On the flip side, we have dried down soil moisture so much over the last month and a half, that you have really said and set this up to say we don't have room to not fall back into a normal to wet pattern. And so this summer, I feel like, is going to be a little bit drawn out. And I think that's how the market is handling it right now, that you're struggling because there's a forecasted inch or inch and a half to majority of those dry areas like Indiana and Illinois. But on the flip side, we need to see that consistently happen, because an inch is not going to get us very far. And so when you see models, midday models, flip and take the moisture back out like we saw yesterday, you are able to get those grains back in and involved. And I think this is where we're going to see that roller coaster of a ride here, because we have really taken away all that subsoil moisture that we need these timely rains. So here in central Minnesota, we're really dry. It's like the grass is starting to get brown. This is very early for us to be doing that at this point. And, you can kind of see the corn's not looking the best by the end of the day. And you have kind of that writing on the wall. Soybeans by far look the worst around us. And I wonder if we're not a pocket. But I have had other producers really talk about how the seed went into the ground so dry that you're just not seeing it germinate, and we have stand issues. And for the longest time, there's a field right outside of my house, and it's corn stubble. And for the longest time, I'm like, why has this guy not planted it? We've had the opportunity. And then I put 2 and 2 together that it is planted. You just literally haven't been able to get the soybeans up. And I'm hoping after the last couple pop-up showers that we've had, we've probably gotten about 8/10 over the last week total. I'm hoping maybe that will help this crop along, but it's definitely not looking the best when you're driving around this area in central Minnesota.
Real quick on the soybean side, beans, you mentioned the flash sale. That seemed to give us support. Then bean oil Friday, a little chatter it sounded like in some of the trade that maybe end users getting buying up some supplies a little bit. That was about all I could find there at the soy side. Did you see anything, any news like that to the effect of why we saw some of that good strength on Friday?
Yeah, I think what you're looking at for soybeans right now is $12 has been such a key resistance point, and for November beans. And anytime you can get above it, I think it makes some outside influences a little excited. Like, hey, we finally got through this psychological level. We're getting going. Like, the momentum's behind us. We have positive divergence. Like, let's do something with this. And I think if you could get a close and sustain it above $12 for a day or two, I think it would bring in some serious buyers and help this market out, but it needs to prove it to us. And I think that's where the buyers came in for the most part, was just you were showing some great things on the chart.
We are having a conversation here today with Kristi Van Ahn-Kjeseth with Van Ahn & Company. Kristi, I want to talk a little risk management. I had a listener question come in here for our discussion today, just saying that, hey, I have a decent amount of old crop corn bushels still on hand. Didn't get a number exactly, but then also haven't necessarily marketed a whole lot of my new crop yet. I'm a little concerned that I'm behind on sales. So to that effect, what would you say to someone who maybe is in that position, either has some old crop supplies still left? I would assume those are gambling bushels at this point. New crop, maybe haven't started. What would you say to someone who's maybe in that position? Let's talk risk management a little bit.
Yeah, when you look at it, my actual biggest concern right now falls into the old crop category. And it's because there is a very large inverse between July and September futures for both corn and soybeans. And I'm not going to say basis can't make up for it, because, never say never. But when you're looking at corn market, that's an 80-cent inverse for July to September. That's a lot of basis that needs to make up. And I'm not sure you're going to see an ethanol plant that's going, already posting 50 over to go to $1.30 over to close the gap. And maybe they can, maybe they're that desperate for corn, but I'm struggling with the fact that in the next 2 weeks, you're going to have these elevators move off of July futures, and we're going to be kind of really setting ourselves back. And so the biggest encouragement I can say is that if you do have an elevator end user, something still going off July futures, sell it. Sell it and buy a September call. And I promise you, this is not a broker coming out of me. That is not why I'm saying this. What I'm saying is that inverse the way it is. If you truly think that this market can keep going, September's got a lot of room to make up for it. And you can participate in that via some way, somehow, whether you want to be, actual full on risk with futures or a call spread. But really, if they're still off those July futures, that's a gift at this point.
There are a lot of options on the table that we can use for our marketing. And with new crop, I know some farmers might be a little hesitant watching a very dry crop right now, but then, again, to the same thing I just mentioned, there are a lot of tools on the table to protect the downside risk and leave the top side open in many cases, et cetera, Kristi.
Yeah, we're being a little patient here on new crop. We're believing in these retracement levels. You've had these pullbacks here in corn market, but they've really been holding their own. So we're going to have faith in these retracement levels. We're going to give it a little bit of room. But, this 550 level to 587 is an area that we're probably going to go hot and heavy on in corn. And if producers really don't want to do that, like you said, there's other ways to do it, right? You can do it in the account some way, somehow. I'm not pushing an account because, to be honest, I'd like to see some more sales on the books for my producers. And so that's what I'm looking at there. As far as beans, I'm being actually really patient when you look at beans. I'm going to rely on the fact that When you look at the supply and demand situation for soybeans, yes, we have bigger carryouts than last year, but it's really not a huge carryout, where 2.2 billion bushel is a very large carryout in corn. Over 300 isn't that bad in beans. And especially the way we are progressing with renewable biodiesel, crush being as strong as it is tied into that, I'm going to wait this out and see if we can get a little bit more power behind soybeans before I consider looking at any more marketing.
Kristi, I should get some thoughts on the livestock trade from you as well. Fairly mixed in cattle on Friday. Deferred hogs had a strong day. Really, it seems the two biggest things I've been watching in livestock has been the continued run up in cash cattle and futures following, and then hogs maybe finally finding a bit of a bottom here the last couple of sessions.
Yeah, so when you look at livestock, when you look at it like specifically cattle, live cattle, when you look at it, it's really hard for people to separate bullishness situations with technicals, right? And so we are bullish on fundamentals. We do not have the numbers that we need. Cash remains strong. There's no sort of negativity right now, even remotely in the cash side of things. You haven't heard it from anyone. You haven't seen anything change. And when you look at it, box beef jumped huge over the last couple months or couple weeks. And I think you're finally going to start to see, hey, we're going to take this futures run up and give it over to the consumer. So we have all of those issues lining up that give you a reason to be bullish. But when you look at a technical formation, when you look at a chart, live cattle got to 2 standard deviations away from trend line. That's a huge thing for markets to do. They don't necessarily sustain them very long. They definitely can, but that is a point where when you start to see that liquidation, it's not so bad to see a little bit of a pullback. And I think that's what you're seeing, and we could see it a little bit more when you come to the futures board for both lives and feeders. But a healthy little pullback, a little bit of liquidation, giving the opportunity for some people that might not completely be as strong as they are, give them an opportunity to get out. That's such a healthy market to see. And so this little bit of liquidation we're seeing is not worrisome to me when you look at where cattle are. As far as hogs go, I hope you're starting to find that support. There's a big difference when you look at the difference between where cattle have performed and where hogs have performed. You've rounded out a bottom. We had a couple sketchy days that you kind of met with some resistance and didn't know if you did. But today's action to see July do what it did, that's a good thing when you look at it on the chart.
Kristi, great thoughts. Any final thoughts you want to share with us or reiterate today?
Yeah, no, it's going to be a wild ride. One thing to note, you have June 19th as a federal holiday now. And so the markets will be closed on Monday, June 19th. And that to me feels like almost the new 4th of July for the trading structure, that it's so important weather-wise that, just make sure you kind of have your ducks in a row before next weekend. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to really dynamically change anything, but just to know what your plan is and what you're looking at and what your goals are. Because when you get into a 3-day weekend in this type of weather format, big things can happen in either direction. And we know what it's like. We've always grown up knowing what it's like to come after 4th of July holiday, how much volatility you have in that structure. And I feel like now that we have that holiday, you have that built in earlier, and just make sure you're prepared for that and spend next week kind of reevaluating what you want and your goals for marketing.
Kristi, if folks want to reach out and talk with you and the team there at Van Ahn and Company to get some marketing advice, how can they get a hold of you?
You can call us at 1-800-648-5494.
Fantastic. And I know they can find you online as well, vanonco.com. With that, Kristi Van Ahn-Kjeseth with Van Ahn and Company, thanks for joining us here this week. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for the show today. Find us online, markettalkag.com. I'm Jesse Allen. Have a great afternoon.